On today's episode, we have Sean Chang. He is the data science manager over at Goodwater Capital based in San Francisco. And today's episode, we are going to discuss the data science approach from a technical and analytical perspective, data structuring, best practices, and end-to-end process, and also how to quantify your value as a data scientist. Enjoy the show. Hey, Sean, thanks for joining. Feel free to tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Arash, thanks for having me. Really excited to share more about personal experiences here. Hi to everyone. I am Sean, and I currently manage the quantitative investment at Goodwater VC. We focus on early stage consumer techs. And before this, I was leading data science teams at Facebook and Google, so not that far away from our current address. And I've served as an advisor to multiple companies around the world on building data innovations in general. I'm really excited to be here and happy to share more.
Awesome. Yeah, you have a great background, so I'm glad we can get into some stuff. So I know one of the talking points that we were talking about off the air was kind of your view about the approach from a data scientist perspective, from a technical perspective, and then an analytical perspective. And I know right now the term data science is not as concise everywhere. It's very ambiguous. So I know you kind of had some thoughts on that, and then kind of just what that means right now in the space.
Yeah, I think data science is a pretty bloated term at this point. Every company's kind of use data science or data scientists as a catch-all phrase for all data-related work. So yeah, my typical advice for companies to just go back to the first principle and pay attention to what kind of business values they're looking for and the type of experiences that would drive those values. In particular, I believe data science is, I think I'm going to quote one of my previous manager who later on created the data science team, not only at Facebook, but also at Sequoia Capital. He said, a good data or a stellar data science rock star is a PM at heart, an engineer by skill with analytical thinking. So what that really translates into is...
that sounds like a 3-in-1 type of person there.
You get 2 for free. That's the deal right now. It doesn't mean that you need to be good at everything, but it just shows how critical it is to be cross-disciplinary thinking and also have enough technical skills just to really leverage the massive scale of data. And I think that's really critical here today.
Yeah, no, I think the PM aspect, I was speaking to a guest actually earlier today for recording, and being able to kind of hold yourself accountable for your work, I think is critical. So that's interesting to note that that's definitely part of the secret sauce to making sure you're successful.
Definitely. I think data science, or as in this general discipline as well as Phil, is almost in a lot of people's minds either really similar to just running analysis or really just a different ways of develop software. But I think at its core, it requires a rigorous process to really know what you are predicting or what kind of value that you are trying to create. And on top of that, understand that it's not a one size fits all. And that's really why this PM or a business owner mindset is really important to keep in mind as we look through all the different applications.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I guess something else, like you'd mentioned, trying to provide recommendations in production, or you go, from a stakeholder management perspective. I know you said there's a dichotomy there. What does that look like in your opinion?
I think it will be a dichotomy in my personal experience early on in people's career. People tend to go deep in one route versus the other early on. But towards the end, you start converging. And then as a business owner and business leader and almost just a data partner, you really need to leverage both. What I mean by that is a lot of the direct or clear value add that data science brings is in recommendations, search results, those things that are in production that can instantly leverage all the real-time data. And on top of that, a lot of more sophisticated ways that we've seen that has added great value to investments in general is just a better way of leveraging time series data. So people that have those technical chops early on are really able to shine because they were able to just drive value directly to end users. However, for a lot of bigger firms, it's also adding great business value by just surfacing insights that unlocks business roadmaps. A case in point, Facebook, when it first doing early 2000s, one of the biggest insight is the number of friends that a new user is supposed to have that really unlocks its retentions and its viral growth. Things like that really, like if you just get one or two nuggets a year, it would unlock massive business potentials almost the same way that a lot of this production system can add value to.
Yeah, I guess nowadays that might be a little bit easier. Back in 2000, to come up with that as the point of metrics to be the determining factor might have been a little bit more tricky. So I guess now, when companies are looking at those key metrics, is there a key component to how you evaluate that, knowing that we think it might be this, but it might not be? I mean, what kind of strategy do you go into kind of identify where that one or two maybe hopeful nuggets you're going to get are?
I think that it goes back to the earlier point you made, which is it's about stakeholder management as well as overall business alignment. It really comes down to understanding the business as a very first principle, and then secondly, work together with other experts in the same field and then within the same company to figure out what is the right path to at least explore. And after you get a lot of this understanding, then really go through, I think, a few more rigorous approach, including testing, including different ways of solving or like creating hypotheses first, and then validate or invalidate it. I think those are some common approach that a lot of research or like academia have really pioneered or really evangelized. But yeah, like at the end of the day, I think any good insights and good KPIs or goals, if you may, really is meant to rally the company towards the right direction. So in order for it to multiply its dividends or to multiply its impact, you really need to get people around it. And that's why the stakeholder management is another path that really usually supports and help more analytical minds or analytically driven data scientists shine.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense. You got to have really that tie in from a technical perspective of data science and then the business side. So it's kind of, if you don't have that 1-2 combination, you're missing something, right?
It can still create great value, honestly. But yeah, like for people that are ultimately going to be a key decision maker, a key decision contributor, you really do need to start honing on both skills as well.
Makes sense. I know you mentioned the end to end process from structuring data best practices. I was curious kind of what steps you go through or you think are best practices and maybe some do's and do nots.
I think there are a lot more do nots because there are just so many good do's. I think that you can, I think, learn from just software development businesses or even just like a historical, like strategic or like strategy operations teams. But high levelly speaking, there are usually three major buckets of works that I tend to emphasize on to create a data moat. It's not just even a practice, it's really how do you differentiate the company by leveraging all this data. So number one is insight collection. And I can talk a bit more on like why it's insight and not just data. And then secondly, it's about defining success. That is usually like a big portion of the work as well. And then third is about building and operationalizing data applications. So I think going back to the first part on insights, and this is where I'm gonna mix in some of the do's and don'ts during those buckets. I think like it's called insight collection because based on what I've seen so far, wrong data is usually worse than no data. Because I have seen, now that I'm no longer with Facebook, I have seen numerous major multi-billion dollar decisions that is based off of wrong data. It ended up being fine because if you just focus on the right overarching goal of like, creating a pleasant user experience, ultimately things will still work out. But we definitely took a lot more detours just because of wrong data. So when I say insight, it's really thinking about the quality of data that you're putting in and also the purpose of those data. Like, what is the type of questions that you're trying to answer? And then how do you validate a lot of this information early on? So one of the do's for companies that are trying to create new products or thinking about launching some kind of new experiences, like when Uber first launched. And then for Facebook, it was when we first launched a VR app that I happened to be part of. It's really about thinking all this data collection, insight collection since day zero. It's not even day one. Because if you start thinking about some of this collection process after you have a product, you're missing out a whole trajectory or like history of users' frustration just getting onto your platform. So since day zero, we actually create a lot of logging. So we, in this case, just like, behavior tracking as well as funnel measurement and monitoring before we even launch the VR app, which is on a completely new interface. But because of those kind of like early emphasis and early attention, we're able to drive engagement like almost by 2x just in the first 2 weeks. So I think that's the first part on the insight collection. And define success, I think this is the part where depending on the stage of the company and depending on the business orientation of the company, it's usually a split between whoever that's driving the overall revenue and then the data science teams that happen to have firsthand knowledge of those feedback insights. So what I mean by define success, it's simple as Facebook caring about users, and then there is a whole org. In fact, one of the highest ranked data professionals or data executives, he is overseeing growth for Facebook. That kind of showcase how important defining the right metric for the company is, and then continuously and almost relentlessly pursuing that metric, how important that is. So I think that is just like one quick example. And also across the board, I think all the portfolio companies that we've encountered so far, and then on some of the companies that I had a chance to advise on, knowing what the North Star is, and then breaking that down ultimately to, I think, manageable and I think executionable, like bite-sized measurement is usually critical.
Yeah, it's tough when you have big initiatives, but it's just you got one mouth and you got to chew. So you got to take your time. So breaking it down, like you said.
Yeah, you're going to aim high, but start small. Hopefully move fast, but that's just the way that we hope it happens.
Yeah, that's the ideal combination. No, that makes sense. And I think those are good points when, you don't know where you're trying to go, then it's really hard to know what kind of metrics even to start with, right? So once you have that defined, then working backwards to get what you need to then drive different business needs and then get your team to work on the right things is a lot easier.
Definitely. I think, yeah, like you said, working backwards is usually a pretty fruitful approach. And also just in general, like thinking about ultimately what matters. In this case, every business is different, but honestly, every business comes down to one or two similar focuses, whether it's just revenue, sales, and then all like, users, customers, or even just enterprise clients. It all comes down to like, paying attention to that ultimate outcome and then find some proxies, like, whether it's working backwards or looking for early indicators that will ultimately drive those things. And then explore on a few metrics and then explore on a few ways to help the business move along the right direction. I think that's where a lot of the focus has been. And also, it's not just do once and then rest on it. It's a regular process and a frequent thing that all the healthy organizations tend to do at a certain cadence.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. You got to always be making adjustments, right? Otherwise, it's tough to keep moving forward.
Yes.
I guess when you're kind of in the situation maybe where there's not a big team and you're coming in, how do you kind of hire for those first few people to kind of kickstart your efforts, right? You've done some due diligence, you have some initiatives that you're trying to get through, but you need a team to make it all work. So what is it that you look for to kind of kickstart some of those efforts?
Typically, I think this is for a startup. I can also talk about like how bigger companies allocate their resources.
And I think both are probably similar, but I think definitely the environments and the resources maybe that you can get, there's a bit of a different challenge. So yeah, definitely let's start with your startup. How do you tackle that problem?
So in the typical case, let's just break down from who will be hiring those professionals. It's typically the CTO or the CPO, people that care about product, that care about technology, because they're like the early co-founders, kind of like a background. And for them, they don't always have the right experience or insights on what is the right person to ultimately drive the growth of a data science team. So like coming from that standpoint, which is it's usually the hiring manager for your first couple data scientists are typically not of a data background. What I have recommended before is to always look for more of a data tech lead from different companies, whether it's companies along the similar business model, or even just like big tech companies. I think like a junior member as a first hire can result in like, too much of a ramp up risk as well as time. And then, but like getting someone that is a little bit too much on the managerial side is not going to get you too much of an immediate help and immediate boost. So like some kind of a data tech lead gives you that balance of personnel that can just go on and then put on some hands-on work and then contribution. But at the same time, they know the end-to-end stakeholder management as well as mentoring of future junior members. And then they also have the potential to be groomed into your future leaders and executives as well. So yeah, like I think that is usually like the type of profile that I recommend startups to go after.
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess if you're at a larger org, is it then really analyzing your current team, their strengths and weaknesses, and then basing that on what initiatives you have and kind of figuring out where that gap is to then identify the right next hire?
Yeah, I think for bigger organizations, it comes down to, like you said, like analyzing what type of personnel you need. And usually it comes down into it's a dichotomy. It's usually really junior or really senior members. And then the senior members can be either manager or like strong individual contributors. So it really comes down to whether you have the healthy balance of having enough junior folks for other people to experience the mentoring and even like, future managerial responsibilities, or you might have way too much ICs, individual contributors, and you just need more people to lead them and guide. So yeah, it really comes down to just the experience level that we tend to focus on.
Yeah, I know it makes sense. I think if you're a startup, you want hands-on people that can get their hands dirty, but also have the ability to grow as you hopefully grow. And then if you're more established, it's really identifying where your team needs has the biggest weakness, and then trying to make your weakness into hopefully a strength and go from there.
For sure. And just to add on to the startup case, I think people tend to just anchor on hands-on professionals. And I think that is going to give you like a short-term yield right away. But I will still push for someone that has at least a little bit more experience, because they can think about the next steps and how to really level up that practice versus just still being more on execution side. And then in the end, you are still bottlenecked by your personal blind spot as a executive.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I know something else that's a tricky topic depending on what org you're at and whether your models get into production is how data scientists can actually quantify their value, maybe just for themselves, and then to then be able to explain that out if they're in an interview cycle or just talking to people. What's your advice for people to be able to actually quantify their value?
I think there are a few cases from like really direct to indirect, and then like the necessary skill sets for each. I think the direct cases are typically like those production system where you can just easily and directly see how your implementation or your contribution drive users, drive conversions, drive engagement. Like this ranges from ranking system, which I had the pleasure to lead a lot of the public content for Facebook. And like, you easily just see how much you can change the user's behavior by those ranking systems. And then secondly, which is actually even more common, is the recommendation system. Like after people have done certain behaviors or activities that matter to companies, how do you encourage them to do more? How do you reduce the friction between that, like, whatever the end point to the next starting point? So I think those are some common cases where you can easily quantify the value and impact, but those will require a lot more awareness and then technical ability of a production system. So people that tend to really perform well in those areas should have some kind of a technical background and also a deeper understanding of the product as well. That will be the more, I think, direct case, but will also be harder to find the talent, just given how high demand those type of backgrounds could be across like the entire software development spectrum. I think that more indirect cases will be the ones where it's more analytically driven, and you are still more in the cross-functional relationship with the production teams. And in those cases, I think two common ways that you can really still help make impact, or at least make visible impact, as we tend to or more of our members too, is to help measure whether things are going well or not as a starting point, and then find out and identify the gaps between the current state and success. I think that's the typical good low-hanging fruit, because I think across the board, across every decision maker, they understand that we can't improve on things until we start measuring them. But what do we measure, and how do we know that those measurements actually lead to the necessary outcome I think that's where a lot of the data scientists have added quite a bit of value.
Yeah, so I guess maybe, if you're at an org and, some of the production models you've worked on haven't gone to production, then that next level to say, hey, maybe it didn't go to production, but the value we got from the data then translated into some other project or translated into, maybe not a direct correlation to revenue or some business goal, but then it impacted and how that impact happened. Because I think that's where people sometimes get stuck is, they work on something, they put their heart and soul into it, and then doesn't get into production. And now it's like, well, somebody's going to ask you, so what have you been working on? And then follow up for the interviewer is, well, how did that help the company? And you're just like, well, it didn't because it didn't get into production. But you're saying, no, there could be other options. You just have to look at where it led to and then use that to then quantify the value.
Yeah, I think everyone, this is a really good topic, should be full owner end to end for their own work and then their own outcome. And that's why we tend to have early checkpoints on even model development. If it doesn't seem to be working along the right direction, we wouldn't push too hard on just the development cycle itself. Like you said, ultimately, it's about adding personal value to whatever the most important things that companies are working on. And there are always some like intermediate results that can still add a lot of value. So we tend to at least help people understand the importance of analysis in between model development. Like, you need to understand your data to build a better model. You need to understand the gaps in your data to know what potential blind spots or possible skew areas for your models could be. And then those understanding can sometimes lead to really good changing direction or changing decisions early on too, while you're still building and buying time for your model building. So yes, that's absolutely right.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. I was curious. I'm sure you've sat in a lot of interviews. What are some kind of interview tips or advice for data scientists that you think would be good for them to know?
I have said on like a few, and I believe this is a really common topic across the board. So I will pick one that really stood out to me, but that's so basic that I think sometimes people just overlook the importance, which is know your SQL. No matter which company and at what level you go in and like what stage the company's in, they always need you to extract data from some kind of database. The level of SQL that you do is probably even higher if you decide to work for a bigger company. Because at that point, you just really need to figure out how to grab all the necessary data that's probably being acquired or logged already. And a smaller company, it really comes down to how sophisticated you want it to be. But SQL will always be a key point of easy to assess technical step. It's not a hard language, it's a scripting language. But it really just saves you so much time on just clearing that bar when you go through any interviews. And I have seen really strong technical candidates that decided to just always brush off on doing SQL because they felt like they can do a lot more complicated manipulation or data management. And my answer to that is you can save yourself like maybe 3 hours of additional conversation or even interview by just knowing some basic things. So it's just an efficiency trade-off.
So fundamentals, do not forget them. Know your basics. So SQL, everybody, if you're going into an interview, do some brushing up. And to your point, Sean, I think knowing the size of the org and knowing kind of where potentially they are pulling data from, that'll help you also prepare. But like you said, every data scientist should know and does know SQL, but just kind of making sure it's an emphasis point before you're going in there. If you're looking for something new, it's a great piece of advice.
Absolutely. Thanks for summarizing it for me.
It's so simple, it's the basic things that people tend to overlook, but it's a lot of times the little things that kind of make the big difference. So
Yeah.
definitely appreciate you being on the episode. If somebody's interested in connecting with you, LinkedIn, is that the best way to ping you?
Absolutely. It's Sean Chang, SeanChang, for at Goodwater. I think I'm the only Sean at Goodwater. So it should be fairly straightforward.
Sounds good. Well, appreciate you being on the show. And for everybody listening, we'll be back. Have a good one. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Arash. Appreciate it.